I want to talk to Annabel Denham now, the Deputy Comment Editor at the Telegraph. Annabel, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
So, let's talk a little bit about Keir Starmer, because he's had another terrible week, hasn't he? Because in addition to coming out and trying to sort of explain why he deliberately withheld information from the British public, which Michael Mansfield, the revered barrister, said to me was entirely wrong, and that he should have and could have given out more information without prejudicing a trial. He's still waiting for the phone to ring. I got this vision of Keir Starmer sitting in Downing Street, you know, just staring at the phone, wondering when Donald Trump's going to make the call, because it's now 5 days into the presidency, and I think Donald Trump is playing with him.
Well, he could well be, Mike, but perhaps Keir Starmer isn't too worried, because at the moment he seems to be trying to find a way to get Britain into the pan-Euro-Mediterranean convention, doesn't he? And in other words, you know, finding some way to, if not undermine the letter of Brexit, then the spirit of it, and bring us back into some sort of customs union with the European Union. You know, I think it's quite clear that this Labour Party risk of using the Trump presidency as a way of cozying up more to Europe. So perhaps that'll provide some solace to them, if not to the British public, for whom the relationship that we have with America is very, very important, particularly when Trump is talking about imposing tariffs on China, on the EU, and of course on Britain as well, in order to try and shore up domestic production over there. So, you know, we'll see. And I don't think it's necessarily that Starmer's just sitting by the phone, but it's also the contrast that's now being drawn between Donald Trump and his attitude towards leadership and that of Keir Starmer, and the way in which Trump is talking up America, and Labour have really spent the last 6 months talking down Britain. And it's left Rachel Reeves going to Davos and having to sort of have her begging bowl out and saying, oh, please come and invest in Britain. But unfortunately, business confidence is on the floor, consumer confidence is on the floor. There's very real risk of recession this year, and it's because of Labour's mismanagement. So perhaps Donald Trump is toying with us, but perhaps he's looking at Britain and thinking that the special relationship isn't quite as important as it once was.
Exactly. And I think also, because we know Donald Trump to be, you know, a slightly mischievous character, you know, he will probably be quite happy to keep Britain on tenterhooks, given what Keir Starmer has said about Donald Trump in the past, where he said he wasn't a fan of his. He didn't want him interfering in British politics. This was many years ago. David Lammy calling him a white supremacist and a misogynist and a racist and all the rest of it. You know, Sadiq Khan saying what he said about him. I suspect that Donald Trump is taking quite a bit of pleasure out of all of this. But meanwhile, talking about Rachel Reeves going to Davos, on the return private jet flight, which I presume she took all the way from Switzerland back to here, she's now decided that the idea of trying to get non-doms to pay more tax was ill-founded. She's now going to water down the idea of actually trying to punish people who make money for this country, and say that she's not going to actually charge them any more tax after all. But unfortunately, 11,000 of them have already left the country.
Well, it does certainly feel like too little too late, doesn't it? The damage has already been done. The message has been sent that Britain isn't open to business, isn't open to the entrepreneurs of the world, the successful of the world to come and live here, and of course pay taxes in the UK, but perhaps not on overseas income. And so it's a welcome watering down of the finance bill, but it's embarrassing for Labour. It's another U-turn. It's another indication that they have no clue how to run a country, that Rachel Reeves is really out of her depth. But we ultimately ought to welcome this decision. The question is whether, as you say, there's already been this exodus of millionaires in 2024. It's believed that we saw more flee than any other country in the world apart from communist China. This year will be no less damaging. I suspect people have already made a lot of their financial plans, but, you know, will it be enough to sort of keep some entrepreneurs and successful business people here investing in Britain? We'll see.
Well, I don't think so, because according to some of the stories that are circulating around Downing Street at the moment, people basically are saying to Rachel Reeves, you've got some dark days ahead. She seems to be out of ideas. She doesn't seem to know what to do. And all of the measures that she's put in place, apart from basically national insurance, are not going to result in getting any kind of money coming into the exchequer at all. You know, the farmers' inheritance inheritance tax is pretty much not going to make them more than, they don't think, about 500 million quid. The schools VAT raid is hardly going to touch the sides. Same goes for the winter fuel allowance. You know, all very controversial policies which they insisted on pushing through, none of which really are going to go anywhere near to getting the huge borrowing problem that we now have out of the way. They borrowed £17.8 billion in December alone.
And of course, the other side of this is public spending. You know, it's all very well saying that you can increase taxes, although Rachel Reeves, of course, in December promised that she wouldn't increase in taxes any further, only to row back from that one quite carefully and have Keir Starmer sort of try and get her out of that hole that she dug herself.
Yeah.
But there is also the spending side of the ledger. So, you know, if they're not going to raise taxes, how are they going to cut public spending? Doesn't seem to be any appetite among Labour politicians to do so. We've heard about welfare crackdowns from Liz Kendall in the last few days, but, you know, governments have been talking about that for years, and it never brings in the money that they say that it will. Meanwhile, our benefits bill is absolutely ballooning. We've got unfavourable demographics, which means we're going to have a shrinking proportion of workers to greys, as they rather unflatteringly call older people. So everything is pointing in the wrong direction. We've got the NHS. The solution to the NHS is always just to pour more money into it without ever demanding any fundamental reform. I did have some optimism that red streeting might bring about the change that's necessary, but we're still waiting. The can's being kicked further and further down the road. And if you just wonder, you know, how long it will be before Britain effectively goes bankrupt. We haven't balanced the books since 2001. As you say, there are all of these tax measures that are being brought in by Labour that will have a very negative impact on the economy whilst not actually raising any revenue for the Treasury. Then you've got all of the additional spending, borrowing costs are going up, and you can feel, Mike, the panic, you can sense the panic among Labour now, because there was Rachel Reeves suddenly talking about a third runway at Heathrow, about expansion of Gatwick and Luton. And you think, well, OK, these aren't actually necessarily growth delivering measures in and of themselves, much as I'd quite like to see us finally build that third runway after decades of politicians talking about it. But, you know, there's no coherence to their agenda, and she's obviously begun this spat now with Ed Miliband that's put him in an awkward position, thus putting Keir Starmer in an awkward position, and they're all just floundering with no real sense of direction. It's alarming to watch.
Yeah, it's a rudderless ship, it's holed below the waterline, it's all of those metaphors that you can bring up about the ancient mariner and, you know, the dreaded sea of calm where they're not able to go anywhere. We meanwhile find out Sainsbury's is saying they're going to cut 3,000 jobs. All the supermarkets, by the way, now backing the farmers and saying, you know, you've got to get rid of this idea of the inheritance tax because, you know, it's a national security issue, it's a food security issue, you know, and they've got nowhere to go. I don't know how they last. I mean, I know I'm bored people to death with this theory of mine that they're not going to last 4 years, but I can't see it happening. I just can't see them getting beyond even this year because it's so disastrous. I think that something's going to have to happen.
Well, I think if one of two things happen, then Labour are in real trouble. The first is if we get much higher levels of unemployment. We had employment data out this week, and it was not encouraging. If we start to see companies making big layoffs, redundancies, not hiring, you know, as the labour force ought to be growing, then that's going to be deeply problematic for Labour. And the other is blackouts. If they keep their pedal to the metal on net zero, and they continue to pursue this agenda in a very top-down, centralised, borderline sort of Stalinist way, then that could, at some point before 2029, lead to blackouts. And again, that is simply not something that the British public are going to accept.
No, absolutely right. Annabel, thanks very much indeed. You can read Annabel's comments, of course, in the Daily Telegraph every single day. Annabel Denham, Deputy Comment Editor at that newspaper. Thanks very much indeed. Have a great